Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we get this show on the road. So thank you so much for being with us. And as I said, being on time. We're going to have a marvelous session today. I'm very excited about this one. It's been a long time coming as we were working on it all during the summer. It's called From Insight to Impact. Now, we run, and you've probably seen many a webinar, maybe many a session on the topic of generating insights and ensuring that they indeed arrive in the most convenient, efficient, and informative way. What you probably haven't seen so much, and that's the point of today's session, is so many sessions on how we go from those insights to impact. And the way I think about this, as you can kind of see from the tagline underneath the title here, is that it's empowering medical and commercial. The reason I emphasize medical, of course, is because typically medical affairs has been, and I use this phrase deliberately very provocatively, a sort of scientific servant to the HCP and even to things internally. But I don't want us to be scientific servants anymore. I want medical affairs to be proactive and in many cases driving the business side of things as well. So how do we go from having that authenticity, that understanding, and that insight to having a stronger impact across the organization and ultimately becoming more authentic as organizations in general? So we've got a popular session today. I think we've got at least 700 people signed up. And what that means is that we can have a great dialogue. So the first thing I want you to do is to introduce yourself. If you haven't already, open that chat window, say hello, say where you're calling in from, maybe even write a sentence about why you decided to come to this session and what you're keenest to hear about. That will, of course, be mega informative to people like me who are trying to make sure that we say everything that you would want to hear. Now, the other great thing about this session is it's not just me that's talking, thank God. We have a wonderful panel ready for you. So, Lance, you have probably met before on a previous webinar. He's making a name for himself because the work that he and his company Within3 are doing is definitely driving us forward. And Lance, of course, joins as, in his own words, a technologist, as well as, of course, being an entrepreneur in this space. He's built a diverse and effective technology company out of his desire to see patient feedback, as well as HCP feedback, of course, properly utilized in life sciences, and is definitely an innovator. Been very impressed with some of the work that he and his team have been doing, and grateful for his support for this webinar as well. Kieran is at AstraZeneca. He's Senior Medical Affairs Leader and is focused on lung cancer at the moment, which of course is highly topical, particularly with the events that are happening in the world right now. He's, of course, got a deep background in research. I'm not going to read out his PhD title because I'll just embarrass myself, but it's very impressive. And he's been a medical writer and now, of course, a senior medical leader at AstraZeneca. I've enjoyed hearing from Kieran in the practice sessions that we've had running up to this session. Sonal is someone who I hope you all know by now because you damn well should. Sonal has been a wonderful agent of change, I would say, for our industry and great supporter of where we need to go. She's got a strong passion for education, so that's fantastic that you are educating us all today, Sonal. And at Pfizer, of course, she uses that passion to help patients, not just internally, by empowering them to make independent decisions, and has been an agent on some of the power of purpose work that you may have seen done from myself and Jill Donoghue of late. So really pleased to have Sonal with us. Now, Justin is someone who we deliberately invited because he's not in medical affairs. As you can see, he's Director of Commercial Strategy and Insights at Genentech. He most definitely is worthy of being part of this conversation because we need to work with commercial. We need insights to flow on commercial. And of course, many of us believe commercial to be doing a better job of having that impact than we are at medical affairs departments. So really keen to hear his insights and how we go ahead with that. Okay, so you might remember that when you signed up for this webinar, you actually answered a couple of questions. So let me show you the results of those questions right now. The first one was how would you describe your organization's current approach to integrating medical and commercial insights into strategic decision making? So here are the results. I guess you could say it's a pie chart, but it's a bit of a normal distribution here. So 4% of people saying it's poor, and 15% of people saying we have a structured process. That's probably the bottom and the top answer. Everyone else hovering around in the middle of those things. So basically, we're all in the right room today, but we all have work to do. That's the conclusion I'm taking from here. By the way, I can see a lot of you haven't introduced yourself in the chat window yet. Come on, guys, let's make this a conversation. What is the most significant challenge your organization encounters when translating insights into actionable strategies? What are the barriers? What are the challenges? And here we've actually got a pretty even spread. I reckon in every one of the probably 1,000 webinars I've done in my life, this is the most even I have ever seen the answers to be. So the winner with 1/4 of the votes, of course, limited resources, but the loser is not so far behind on 11% with difficulty in quantifying insights. So that's the starting point for today. But before we hand over to our panel, I don't want you guys to just sit back and relax. No, that's not what you're here to do. I want you to answer another question, if that's okay. So on your screens in just a second, you will see current capability coming up. So there's a question for you here. How effective is your organization in translating insights from medical affairs into actionable strategies? A very much scene-setting question for you. How effective are you today? And I think this will give us a little bit of an idea of where everyone in the room currently is. I'll hold that open for a minute or two while you answer and read through the responses. And in the meantime, I'm going to get rid of my slides and invite the panel to turn their cameras on and say hello. So panel, do please come and join me. Marvelous, marvelous.
Hello, Paul.
Hey, how you doing? Okay, everyone looking bright and bushy-tailed today. That's great. Okay, I'm just gonna, let's start by seeing the answers for this poll. So I'll hold it open for 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Let's have a look at the results. I can see most of you are still awake. That's always good. Right. Yeah, again, it's not too dissimilar from the poll we saw before. So only 6% of people saying well integrated and driving measurable business outcomes. Those 6%, please let yourselves be known so that I can invite you to the next webinar as speakers, as you obviously are ahead of the pack. The bulk of you, 2/5 of you, saying insights are part of strategy discussions, but always don't always result in action. And you can see the remaining results there. Okay, guys, we've got work to do. That is very clear. Let's start by talking about the challenge. Why is this difficult? We have been trying to do this for quite some time right now. And why, despite the gains that medical affairs have generally made across companies, why is there still a gap between having the impact that we want to have and where we are today? I would love Justin, Kieran, and Sonal to give me some thoughts on that. Whoever wants to go first, please do.
Sure. Maybe I can start, Paul. I think I might start by, blaming you, because I think in your intro you mentioned how much work you've done and others on how we gather insights. And I think we find ourselves in a world now, in insights world, as well as in the rest of the world, where we have kind of information overload, and we've gotten so good, whether it's through field medical or other ways, to get insights into the business. But what we haven't yet quite figured out, at least in my experience, is, how do we centralize those in a way that we can assess them effectively, as opposed to just having, an overwhelming number of insights coming in from all angles.
Okay, so the problem is the deluge of data. The deluge is actually is that more of a problem, Kieran, of determining which insights should have impact? I'm just thinking that's not a problem of kind of communicating or embedding those insights into strategy, either product or bigger than product strategy later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a question of also prioritizing the way we look at the insights, and that's what we'll come on to later in today's session. But you talked, I saw in the results there, talking about medical as a silo, and I think again, we have insight reports coming through the medical channels, but then we also have the CI reports, the commercial reports, our analytics teams. And I think when all these are coming in through different platforms, different channels, whether it's Dex or Viva or whatever the case might be, it's sometimes very difficult to really drill down and figure out what is the landscape telling you as a whole, as opposed to just, what you happen to look at on that one day.
And do you find other things, Kieran, are getting prioritized over these insights because of that volume?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big issues with so many things in our world, that the day-to-day, here and now, what you need to deal with versus your medium to longer term thinking. I think near term can often get in the way.
Okay, good to hear. Sanal, love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Kieran. I think we are in a world of a lot of data from all parts of the world, right? And I think, as Kieran mentioned, there's a lot of reports, a lot of data being collected, but I do think we need to take a step back and think about, what is it that we're trying to measure? What are we trying to solve for? What is that question? Because otherwise it's back to, yes, you can collect all the data you want and keep them in amazing, beautiful SharePoints and repositories. But then where's that brain that, and AI is not going to help here. It's, what is it that you want to do and how does it affect your business? And by business, I don't mean medical business, because when we just think medical business, then we become siloed. When we understand what our commercial needs are, what the brand needs are, and how medical can be a part of solving for that need, then we can go backwards and say, okay, well, what insights do we need to collect to understand if we're in the right path? And if not, how do we change? So it begins with a different question.
And Sunil, do you find that medical is always part of the table, that's part of the conversation, where we are actually able to determine what the biggest impact insights would actually be? You're senior vice president, so you are probably more at the table than others might be. But even at Pfizer, do you find that you're always part of company strategy level conversation where you can actually action that and then pass it on to others?
So I'll be honest with you, even within a company, it varies asset to asset and the dynamics of every group. My mission has always been to have a medical and commercial partnership on developing a strategy and understanding how medical will shape that in partnership. I've seen it done. I've done it in the past very nicely. I've also seen when it's not happening at all, and we're all sitting in the same company. And so our mission right now is to try to show and elevate these good practices so that in the future, when you ask me this question again, I can widely say, absolutely. But I don't believe in any company it's happening holistically yet.
Yeah. And Sunil, just staying with you for one more question, if I may. I realize you will not want to put anyone under the bus, but can you just give us some indication of the forces that are at play when things are not going so well? Like, as I said at the top, this conversation is about the challenges. So can you just articulate any further what the barriers for you are in stopping that beautiful medical commercial harmony that you are striving towards? What's stopping that?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a people issue. I think it's the dynamics of rushing through to do something. So if you have a deliverable to senior management and you're in commercial, you're going to drive through and go really quick. And at times, people are not brought on board and say, let's think through this strategy and understand what we need to deliver. It becomes very reactive. And I think that reactivity is what puts us back into old habits, I would say. But when we can actually be proactive and take moments to think through, that's where ideation happens and creativity and co-partnership. So I think it's a dynamic that will always exist, but we need to be more mindful of bring each other on board on what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Sunil. I do also want to say that everyone on today's webinar is sharing their own insights from the personal point of view and not necessarily that of their companies. And we are hoping for an open and free conversation here. And in the spirit of that, I want Justin to chime in. Obviously, Justin, you're working from commercial, as I said before. What do you think are the barriers? What do you think are the challenges?
I think Sonal hit it on the head a bit. I think insights aren't we use the word insights for a lot of things. They may not all be actionable. And if we take a step back and go, what is, and this is how we think about it in commercial, what is the A to B shift that we're trying to put together? What's the B? Let's say the B is to get a better formulary position. I'm making it up. That frame, and framing is really important here, then tells us what are the particular insights that would be useful, leading and lagging. So what's leading? Well, for instance, a particular payer, we had a good conversation with the payer. Lagging, actually formulary position changes. So that type of frame helps us maybe filter out all of the insights that are being provided to us in many dashboards and many other types of mediums where we go, we have to act on this. Should we not act on this? So I think there's, again, as Kieran was saying, deluge of information. How do we organize that information, frame it in a way that's actionable so that we can then track whether we are making progress against it? And I think the root of the problem is we didn't really have to do this before. We were in markets that weren't hyper competitive. There wasn't a need for commercial and medical to connect in the ways that we need to today, because sometimes HCPs cannot be accessed from a commercial standpoint. We need to rely on our medical associates. So that's just one part of why we need to work together as medical and commercial, and why insights themselves are not really valuable unless we frame them and put them in context for action.
Yeah. Justin, I believe that Roche Genentech is a company that is very scientifically driven and has a better relationship with medical and commercial than average. But I'm very keen to sort of hear if you have something specific to say about why that is, and why you as a person in commercial are very collaboratively minded, because I think it's safe to say that not everybody is. And that sometimes it can be simply, Sonal said it wasn't down to people, but I do think there is a personality difference in any case. And that's fine, but there is also a bit of a barrier sometimes. Just tell me a little bit more about breaking down that barrier.
I believe it's cultural. If you have in a particular company where people in commercial believe that they're way better than medical, or vice versa, those things are hard to work through. And from a cultural perspective, if you believe you have to collaborate on a particular customer to get them to get a piece of information, things change a little bit. So I believe our field reorganized 3-4 years ago to not be vial based. That has helped in terms of commercial medical relationships, at least from a field standpoint. And I won't pretend that it's absolutely perfect. There needs to be more connection between the two groups, especially as it results to omni-channel and looking at the holistic customer. But at least from a cultural standpoint, there is a focus on collaboration. But there's a double-edged sword to that. Collaborate too much, 9 months go by, customer doesn't hear anything. There needs to be some action as well. So there's always a other side of the fence when you look at these things.
Great. Lance, I'd love to actually bring you on this, as you obviously see across companies. Let me just quickly say that some of you in the chat, loving the chat window, loving some of what people are sharing, but some of you are only sharing it with hosts and panelists and not with everyone else. So I am enjoying it. I don't know if anyone else is. So make sure you toggle that little blue drop-down box to be everyone, and then share again if you made a mistake before. Lance, over to you.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, just building on what's already been said. So Justin, I very much agree with your framing point. I think any good insights process starts off with some sort of thing you're trying to accomplish, some sort of either medical or commercial strategy that you're trying to execute or improve or analyze. And if you don't have that, then how do you know what's an insight or what's not? It's just kind of academic information. So I think good organizations, this starts off with some sort of framework for their strategy or what they're trying to accomplish. And then the insights process serves that. It almost serves as like your thesis. And then your insights process is proving or disproving whether or not you're accomplishing what you're doing. The second thing that I'd mention too is I find talking to organizations, depending on where you are, with what's an insight and what does it mean to different people. So I think there's two flavors of where people talk about insights. One is insights at like the HCP level. So I'm going to go meet with Dr. Kieran next week. I need insights as to what his preferences are, what might be best to share with him, what his history is, et cetera. That's like the HCP kind of sort of level of insight. And then there's the broader like insight around your strategy. To Justin's point, I'm trying to affect formulary change. And so I am looking not at just what Dr. Justin says, but I want to understand across the board, what do we understand about market access? What do we understand about challenges? What do we understand about evidence that might be required to gather, to show someone you should move this on your formulary? And how are we assessing that in real time? And then as that formulary position changes, how do we know? And so that level of forest for the trees, I view the HCP level as like a tree in the forest. How do we know everything we need to know about each and every tree? And then there's the broader, how do we know that we're impacting the forest as a whole? So I think that's there. And the last point I would make is I think insights and what's insights versus data versus a metric. Some of these terms can be interchanged. I know hopefully we'll talk about metrics and things like that on this webinar. But just because I have a great meeting with Dr. Kieran and he says, oh, if your pill was blue instead of red, that would be much more meaningful to my patients. That might be an insight about what Dr. Kieran thinks. It may not be an insight that matters to the strategy, because I may look at that comment and say that makes no sense relative to our overall strategy. So it's a point of data, but it's not really an insight until you assess it against that strategy and say, does this either validate that we're doing the right thing, and to the point that not every insight is actionable, because it might just be saying you're doing the right things, keep going, or you might analyze that data and say something needs to change, whatever that is. Tactics, planning, or maybe even it opens up a different avenue of your strategy. So I think the way I think about it is those data points are verbatim meaning what people are saying to you directly is kind of the things you're analyzing. And out of that, you then determine an insight, which requires the expertise of all of us on this call to determine whether that's an insight really. And then you move down the actions and kind of further down the path.
Lance, I don't know if you agree, but I think one of the, and I know that was just one illustrative example, like for every Dr. Kieran who might like the blue, you'll find a Dr. Sonal who prefers the red. And I think one of the issues in big organizations, and it scored relatively low actually on the survey, but is essentially that confirmation bias piece, which is, it's usually not that hard to find someone who broadly agrees with what you're doing, but it's having the quality of insights and the ability to interrogate, like you say, insights on like the forest rather than an individual tree, to know whether you need to sort of turn the ship a little bit or a lot. And I think that's where, again, maybe it's sometimes like quote unquote the easy option, right? You just talk to people who agree with you and then your life is easy. And again, I think that's where, as we get into like really thinking about how we analyze insights properly, can help a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Confirmation bias is huge. Go ahead, Sonal. I think that's it.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I was actually going to double click on that because I think it is real, but I don't think people, all of us, recognize we're in it. And I think it would be very valuable to start to look at data as data and take away that emotion, like, oh, I know this doctor, let me go talk to him. We all do it. So how do we first acknowledge confirmation bias and then remove it so that we actually get real insights and not what we like to hear insights? And that's truly one of the biggest barriers I suspect we're all facing these days. And I like that someone wrote AI is probably going to be very useful because it doesn't care what you want to hear. That's very, very true. I love that.
It also connects to the advances we're making in how quickly we can get real world data. We had an example recently, details don't matter, but we're hearing anecdotally from physicians that they're doing X, which is different to what the quote unquote guideline standard of care would be. And we're saying, how many patients would you do that in? They're saying 20 to 30%. Took us 2 days to look at a very large available data set that we have to see was actually even higher than that. And more than half of patients were getting treated in the way, at least in the community setting, in the way that was being described. So that was, again, very having those tools that don't just dig into the insight of where did this come from, why do they think like that, but actually, are they is it a perspective, is it a belief, or is it actually something that we can back up? I think is also very useful.
Let's continue this conversation for a couple more minutes, but at the same time, I'm going to launch another poll question because this really gets into the weeds of what we're talking about. And as you can see, the title of the question is Making It Work, and it's a two-part question, so make sure you see both parts. And I'll let you read the questions and answers and answer that. I'll probably come back to the results in 2 or 3 minutes time, so we'll come back then. I'm enjoying where we're going with this. What I want to know is whether you guys believe that those medical leaders who are gathering those insights and determining how impactful they could and should be, whether or not medical affairs are still suffering from the business nous, the business understanding, the business exposure that we've been sort of fighting for a while now. Do you think that there is still a disconnect at the top of the tree that's preventing us from having that influence and preventing us from being influenced by the wider organization? Whoever wants to go.
So I think not necessarily, certainly not, from my personal experience. I think one of the challenges, and Sonal touched this at the beginning, is like what you're being measured against, because if you want to get people to trust that what you're doing has value and brings value to the wider business, you have to be able to show what that measure is, and that's something medical affairs has obviously struggled with since the dawn of time. One of the options in the poll there that I think is what triggers a lot of that is anything kind of incentive driven against the type of metrics that we can do, because from a medical perspective, if it's get more patients diagnosed at an early stage of disease, increase screening, whatever the case might be, where it's not about ultimately, do they get your specific medicine? Being held accountable for things that are so impacted by broader forces and infrastructures I think is what's scary to medical. So I think finding impact measures that align with the business goals, but are actually within our capability, I think is one of the key gaps that we need to work on.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to agree with Karen on this, because there is another aspect, which is we all work in a very highly compliant arena, right? Pharma is viewed as a very strict regulatory compliant force. And so, yes, we can align with commercial, and we need to make sure that patients get access to our medicines. But then when we're collecting insights and actioning on them, sometimes you actually have to go back into your silos in order to do a really good job. So you step away from, okay, we got it. We know what the business needs. Now medical is going to be able to do something like create an algorithm that's going to help detect those patients and really work with large networks to do it. And almost like separate yourself from commercial so that there's no connection to, well, you're just trying to sell a medicine, right? No, we're actually trying to get patients as physicians, as healthcare providers. We want those patients to be coming in earlier into the diagnostic journey so that they can have access to the right medicine at the right time, right? So it's a very fine line, and you have to really, as medical colleagues, walk on that very well and ensure that you're in partnership, but also doing everything with the utmost ethical considerations for patients.
Dani, a good friend and someone I'm sure that we all in this room know and admire, is asking why the separation is needed in this example. Sonal, do you want to just quickly address that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, the example that I'm providing on creating a medical algorithm, there's phases, right? So when you're doing the research component of it, then you're not really working with commercial. Once you get to the point where, okay, now let's go into accounts, let's figure out how collectively as an external stakeholder, our field medical, our sales colleagues, who is going to do which part, we come back and partner together. But similarly, when we're working in the research partnership of developing these, not the tool, but the algorithm's research. So that is where you need to separate a bit. And medical affairs has the ability to say, okay, we're taking this, we're running it, we'll get the results and then come back to the cross-functional group and say, now we're ready to actually put this out into the community. So the research has to stay separated from the commercial lens.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll. So let's have a quick look at the results there. And tempted to just allow our panel to react to this before we move on. We've got a pretty clear winner. In establishing cross-functional teams is the one structural change that most people would say, nearly 2/5 of you on that. And then which mechanisms does your organization currently employ to ensure formalized? It's quite an even spread, actually. So yeah, ad hoc is, again, nearly 2/5. And formalized regular meetings, just about 1/3 of you. Of course, you could pick more than one for that second part there. So there's a lot of people who are doing multiple things, of course, in that list. Panel, feel free to jump in if you've got any direct comments to make, or if anything's a surprise there. But what I actually want to do next is to just hand it over to Lance for a few minutes, because he's done a deep dive think on some of how structurally we can indeed improve the situation that we're in now. And of course, the subject of technology came up already. And we all know that that is Lance's forte. So Lance, very keen to hear what you have to say.
Sure. Yep. And while I'm getting ready to share, I'll just react quickly to the panel, to the poll results there. It's interesting to see that it's really organizational setup, I guess, an organizational maturity with insights that is, in both questions, kind of rising to the top as what needs to be done or what's important. And I think it speaks a little bit to what Kieran was saying earlier, is it's, on the one hand, is your organization set up to have a forum to communicate and discuss these things, but on the other hand, is what is being discussed useful, or is it just a deluge of interesting but not really helpful information, and it goes into your Dropbox folder, wherever you store things that you've looked at once, and maybe someday you may go back, but probably not. So I'm going to
Can I just say something? There was a lot of chat communication on the dashboards and the utility of dashboards. I think it's because I brought up the SharePoint component as well. I think I'm really interested in the increased cross-functional partnership that I think over the last 15 years continuously talk about, but it's still inherently kind of the gap that exists in how we're functioning within an organization. And I would love for us to one day be able to say, there is no other way. We are a cross-functional team. We don't work in silos, except when we have to deliver on, let's say, a publication or a research study. But I wish there was a better way to keep those insights and measure them that goes beyond a dashboard and places that people have to go to, because we no longer function that way as humans. Information comes to us. We don't go seeking it in a website or a SharePoint, right? So it's just sharing something that maybe in 5 years will look very different than today.
Yeah,
that's a great point. And that's
actually
actually a lead-in.
Sharing your insights in the chat. Over to you, Lance. Yeah.
Actually a lead-in, so I'm going to talk about some of where the technologies are. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides for us to maybe think about both in the chat and as a panel. So this is a kind of a quick maturity model that you can kind of look at and maybe place yourself. When we work with organizations, the goal is we want to get to the upper right box, which is strategic, where we have a defined strategy and communications process, and we have the tools that we need to process and bring a lot of information and data into our insights process to make sure we're seeing the forest holistically and correctly. And that's where we all want to be. A lot of organizations are in the informal stage, which is, we collect information, we look at it on some ad hoc basis. Some teams we're pulling things out of a CRM into a spreadsheet and analyzing them manually and communicating those things together, and that's okay. But maybe we don't have a formalized kind of process or for our strategy and how we're putting that down. Defined is where maybe we do have that. We have strategic imperatives or strategic pillars or key information topics that are, set out across the organization. But again, maybe we're struggling with the deluge of data. We don't have strong tooling to help us bring those together, or we're looking at those data sets in silos one by one, and they don't really come together until, you know, somewhere upstairs from where I sit in the organization. And then capable in the upper left is, again, perhaps we have tooling. So we've implemented some tools to help make some of this work easier, but perhaps we haven't solved some of the things we were just talking about as an organization. How do we make this a best practice across the organization and so forth? So I think this is potentially a good way to kind of look and say, where's my organization, and what do we kind of need to get to the upper right, where you can really be impactful. I think an organization that is strategic, that is, we have those points of strategy, we're measuring against them, the data is coming in against them, and we can demonstrate change or impact, is where medical wants to be, as opposed to these others where you're maybe gathering interesting information, but you can't demonstrate results. So that's kind of a quick maturity model. And then I'm going to present one more slide just on the technology side, and then I'll stop and we can go back to interesting discussion. So I'm going to talk about the AI in the insight space. And again, I'm talking about the problem of the forest, not the AI for meeting an individual doctor and where across omni-channel should I communicate with him or her. I'm talking about the AI of all these insights. So a couple of things to start with this. One is that the point of all of these tools is to augment humans who are smarter than the tools. That's just a fact. So none of these tools are ever going to be smarter than and know more about the therapeutic area and have deeper experience than the professionals in the room. But what these tools do is eliminate, hopefully, a bunch of the work to allow that expertise to shine and come through. And I feel that there's 4 ways you can assess the different technology approaches or any platforms or things you're building in-house from a medical business point of view. One is, what's the quality of the insights and actions the tool's generating, because these tools are analyzing and generating these things. 2, how much time is it saving me? In terms of if I was trying to do this manually the old way. 3 is, how is it helping me report? So what Sanal was just talking about, how is it helping me communicate this across the organization? What's the quality of that? And then 4 is, what data is seamlessly being analyzed and pulled in? Is it just looking at field by itself, or is it looking at multiple things at once, and how does that work? So here's kind of the way to think about the different technologies that exist from AI. So the first one is what I'll call dashboard AI. This is really what has really started about 2017, 2018. And what these tools do is they have natural language processing, and they take a bunch of text from meetings with call notes, for example, from the field, and they say, oh, this concept is popping up 76 times, and let's chart that over time. And this concept is positive or negative, and let's chart that over time. And what you get is a bunch of dashboards in a BI tool or some sort. And it's up to the professional to look at those dashboards and say, oh, this sentiment went up or down. Does that mean anything? What does that mean? Why do I care? And then keep going with the idea of having to kind of push that all the way through the process, put that into a PowerPoint, what the takeaway is, communicate that in some way. Gen AI is something that most organizations are experimenting with in all kinds of different ways. And Insights is no different. So I know a lot of companies who are saying, oh, what we're going to do is take the field notes data, we're going to pass it over to OpenAI or one of the other the Gen AI large language models and say, summarize all this for me and tell me what the insights are. And they'll get back some series of sentences from that. Those consumer tools don't work very well for that. So one of the ways that I think about insight quality is mentally, I think if I had a medical writer and I said, do this work, what quality would I expect? So in my experience, both of these, especially the consumer Gen AI, works almost like an intern level. The get back is very high level. It's very generic. You should run an education program around this, might be an action, which is kind of like, no kidding, that's what we do here. And then the time saved, it helps you with some of the analysis, but you still have to go through and figure out what it is, edit or make the information deeper, throw it onto PowerPoints. It doesn't generate slideware or communicate for you. So that's all still manual. And then usually these models have limits on how much data you can put in. So typically what's happening is you're doing that just with your field or maybe you're doing that with social listening data, or maybe you're just doing that with medical information data, but kind of one data set at a time. So a lot of companies that maybe invested in the dashboard AI tools, or some of the dashboard AI vendors are adding kind of a consumer chat GPT prompt in there where you can kind of ask it questions. But this is kind of the results that you get. The next layer, and that's kind of what this is, where you kind of combine the two. So you still have your dashboards, you still have this way to kind of get a prompt together, and that's kind of your system. And so again, the output quality, because the AI on the Gen AI side is not trained on life sciences, it doesn't know life sciences terms, doesn't know the context, doesn't know what your strategy is. What you tend to get is still that high level summary sorts of results, but it is better than just you manually going into a prompt on your own. At least it's kind of in there together. And then you have a whole set of kind of a continuum of tools where companies are generating AI models that specifically are built for life science insights. So these models understand medical terminology. They know what market access means. If you ask ChatGPT, look at this data and tell me what the market access implications are, you'll get all kinds of crazy results. It doesn't really know what market access means. So these tools understand life science terminology. They do a lot of work around different data manipulation. And with these tools, there's really, depending on the maturity of them, you can really see how some of these metrics change. So the high maturity ones, you have very high quality insights and recommendations coming out. What the higher maturity ones also do is automate all the reporting for you. So it's not just log in and see the dashboard, but they're literally generating executive summaries and PowerPoints that can be edited and shared in a standard format. And they also can combine multiple data sets together. So if you're looking at the forest and you're looking at field data on its own, and then social on its own, and then, we're in oncology, we went to ESMO and ASCO and look at those on their own, and then look at medical information on its own, and try to do all that one by one, you're not really analyzing the forest. And so the more mature tools understand each of these different types of data, seamlessly integrate them, and kind of pull out what does it all mean across the board. So this is, I think, an interesting way to kind of think about how to assess what your tool set is. And then, in terms of impact, I think these are the four things that mostly folks care about when they think about this process. And if you have one of these tools, going back to the first slide, it at least gets you here. And hopefully it's an easier journey to get into the green than if you're trying to do some of this work with tools that are at the bottom of this. There's so much work to make the tools work well that it's harder to get into the upper green. So hopefully that's helpful. That's what I wanted to share, and maybe we can discuss agreement experiences and so forth. I will stop my sharing, but I can bring these back up if someone wants to make a specific point and reference any of those two slides.
Thank you, Lance. I really appreciate it. It might sound strange, but I actually want to come to Justin first on this, just because I kind of want to see, with what you've shown, Lance, obviously showing the different maturity capabilities and how that kind of compares. I know we're not here to compare and contrast exactly, but I am curious as to what sort of impact you think that would have on the commercial organization, knowing that that is what's being produced on the other side in medical.
Well, I want to go back to Sonal's point that was really powerful here. Despite the great insights that we may have in commercial, we had to build the capability of measurement. So we had a cross-functional team focused on taking marketers, taking their greatest measurement challenges, what's a good insight, what's a bad insight, positioning them as experts over time so that in their own organization, when they're gathering insights, they're able to either action it or put them away. And it's a new skill for all of us because we're in hyper-competitive markets, and these insights are teaching us stuff about the business that we may not have known, and is also making us observational scientists in data that's not necessarily medicine related. I wanted to highlight Sonal's point there. In the next 5 years, I think we can get there. It just needs to be framed as a capability exercise internally, that we get better at making decisions with various insights, being able to frame it as this is good, this is the forest, this is a tree. Despite technology telling us it, I think as humans, we need to engage with it in a different way. Back to Lance's framework, to get to the top right, I think we need both. I think we need automated insights that have reduced bias using AI and at the same time structure to act on it, and not just asks from the top saying, prove yourself. Let's actually define that future ourselves. And we can say, these are the leading and lagging indicators we think are most impactful. They don't need to be ROI, even though I come from commercial. There are other ways of having impact that don't have to have drug sales associated with it. Is it a change in behavior that we expect from an HCP set, a persona of HCPs? Is it a different approach to a particular national payer? You can go down the list, and it doesn't actually have to be your drug sales. But if we are changing behavior in positive ways, that can be measured.
Would you say in general, just in those KPIs on the commercial side, are becoming more nuanced over time?
Our understanding of them is becoming more nuanced. I don't think the insights themselves are revolutionary, but the way that we look at them is changing, and the way that we can experiment to learn more. And we're seeing early successes in medical affairs and Genentech to experiment a little bit to gather data. So let's say these insights don't make a lot of sense. The forest doesn't make sense. The trees don't make sense. We're being asked by our leadership to do something. What's an experiment that we can run to understand whether something is working or not? Let's show medical info content to a particular region and not another region. Does it change behavior? Do we see something different in the marketplace? And so those are the types of things that I think can build confidence and have folks understand the insights in a deeper way instead of just being shown them. And that's what we've really learned in commercial, and we're trying to scale to medical affairs as we speak.
Yeah, thank you. Kieran and Sonal, I would love to hear your thoughts on both of Lance's slides there, but also let me launch one more audience question, which is specifically about the technology side of things, in fact, specifically about the AI side of things. And Lance obviously talked about the incredible time saving that is now available with more sophisticated tools. Just want to crowdsource the opinions on how and where people think that the best AI interventions should be. So while that's going on, Kieran, Sonal, love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll just mention, again, I guess one practical way that we're using this, and again, I suspect we're embarrassingly low in terms of how we could be using some of these tools, but one thing that's impacted like my day-to-day working is around the ability for some of the tools we use to look at all the field insights that are coming from regions where they're not being entered in English, and to be able to quantify and qualitative assess those in the same way that I can manually look at ones that are in English. So for instance, we have a huge MSL team in China, in other parts of Asia, and they're going into the CRM in their local language. And so when we get insight reports now, I'm able to see, there's a theme, around a certain theme, we're seeing, X number of insights specifically related to topic X, from these countries, and this is what they're saying, and it's already in, it's collated, it's in English, as opposed to waiting until you speak to your colleague and having them try to explain it to you, etc. So that's a very basic way that I think some of these tools are already starting to impact.
So no.
Yeah, as I'm in reflection mode, because I think, the comments are just making me think about the future. So we'll go back 2 years. Did we even talk about Gen AI and AI and compare what work we can do versus an automated system? We didn't. I think it's evolved so much, and I'm really thrilled to see Lance's slide that shows over 90% of a very senior medical writer developing, the tool is similar to their level, right? Where are we going next? What are going to be the tools that come out of here? We as commercial and medical colleagues, everyone on this line, are adapting to all this. We need to start to even write insights in a way that makes sense, so that when a computer is collecting them, you can understand it. So often that phone call with someone in China helps you understand what was that true conversation, what was that true insight, but what someone in the field is putting into a system may not fully capture that. And I see someone wrote social listening. That's exactly where I'm getting at, right? So then you now have tools that can listen in on the conversations and pull out the actual insight. But we also have to be very careful, because what we think is that insight that's being captured, is it truly what was captured? And now a tool is telling you, well, you know, you're heading 64% in this area. Is that truly the right place? So I think we're going to evolve and get smarter in how we understand the tools and be able to actually look at those firewalls or even those blind spots where you can say that actually doesn't make sense. Is this true? Can we find a different way to validate whatever we're seeking or capturing in these insights? So that's my worry area of how we're utilizing AI, and the importance of us not going 100% in it, but still have the human collective cross-functional mind to look at it and question, is this A, answering the question, and B, does it really make sense? Yes, we're doing it very quick. That's wonderful, but we still need to continuously take a step back and say, does it make sense?
Absolutely. Lance, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Just before you talk, I'm going to quickly end that poll and share the results, because I think you might want to comment on these as well. So you can answer both.
Yep. And the number one is the integration of disparate data sources. So that's exactly where I was going to go with my comment. I think what one of the things that the technology needs to do to kind of get to that level. So social listening data is vastly different than field data. Social listening data is a needle in a haystack. It's a little more of the wild, wild west in terms of what may be out there and how it may relate. And the volume is much higher typically than field, where oftentimes even what you're getting from the field may already be structured in how you're having MSLs ask certain questions or ask about certain topics. And so I think if you're manually trying to work through the different data types and try to bring them all together, it's quite hard to do, not just on the analysis of it, but even what data should we be analyzing and why. And even to your point, Sonal, like, do we need to do a lot of manual kind of tagging and effort on the data before it goes into the system? Or is the system smart enough to understand the context of where the data came from and have algorithms to then weigh it accordingly? And so those are the sorts of things that we work on to try to get this process up that chart. But I think clearly as an organization, it's been too hard for too long to look at the forest overall versus here's the forest as it pertains to field or field in a region. And then here's the forest as it pertains to, you know, the last 90 days of medical information queries. Here's the forest as it pertains to this. We ran an ad board last week, and here's what the experts said. And so I think it's incredibly important. But I do, Justin, I'm a big fan of everything you're saying. Like I think getting this conversation to, and you're doing that to prove X or to accomplish X or notice if X is changing, is where we all want to be.
Time is marching on, everybody. Sorry to say, it flies when we're having fun, as we all know. What I am going to challenge our panel to do in the last few minutes is to pretend that they are CEO for the day, or maybe for a few days. And if they can wave the magic wand and place additional resources into anything of their choice, how would they, or where would they put their investment to ensure that the impact of those insights is not just heard, but transformational for the company in the right way? And while the panel answer that question, there's a final poll from me all about what you would like to do next. I've got some options here. Would you like to continue the discussion, but have everyone's microphones on and actually have a bit more of a debate on this in another session? And there's some other options as well underneath for you can tick all that apply for that second part of the question. So panel, I didn't give you any prior warning of this because I'm clearly not very nice. Putting you completely on the spot, it's your chance to be CEO. What are you going to do?
I can start. I'm very tempted to say I would give all my money to Lance and let him figure it out. I think we might already be doing that, to be honest. think, again, I think, Lance touched on this earlier around, measuring before, during, and after what you're doing. And I put it in the chat a little bit, but one advice I always give to people is like, do less things, make the things you do more impactful. And so if I was CEO, I'd really try and get medical teams at both local, regional, global level to be really precise in 2 to 3 things that they think they're going to be able to do that's impactful for the business, and find ways to gather insights and measure impact around those 2 to 3 things, rather than now where it's every single conversation, it's 5 pieces of information that someone told you, which, and 90% of them, like, you either already know or you don't care.
Yeah, I would love to hire Lance. Actually, we should hire you now. But I think I would really love a world where we had one tool, one visible tool to every function in the organization that captured everything in every function of the company. I think right now everyone has their own tools, then you have to integrate, some can, some cannot, some have challenges. As a CEO, I would like to have that one tool that showcases that. And I would also celebrate every insight that led to a change, an action that led to a change. Because that's when you're taking away confirmation bias. When you can say, we decided to change something based on an insight and the outcome looks different, that's when I know we've succeeded. And I would actually celebrate that and make sure everyone in the company pulls out these examples.
I like that idea. I wonder if you could create a cross-company celebratory network.
Yeah.
So that the herd across, and we're not just celebrating internal single company. Probably won't happen, but I can dream. 2 more to go.
I can pipe in. Actually, if I were CEO, I'd agree. I agree with mostly what other folks are saying, and I'll build on what Sonal said. Centralized source, celebrating success on behavior change, and I also would celebrate failure for trying, because we actually learn something from trying, and insights come from that, and we should celebrate that as well, so that we don't be afraid that what we did may not have had impact, but at least we learned, and that loop is building the particular capability. And doing that will have people understand the centralized source even deeper. Like, oh, those insights there, I don't know if they're super useful for those 2 to 3 actions that Kieran is referring to. Maybe we need to go cross-functionally and develop other types of insights, or use technology to aggregate insights in ways that make more sense. So it's this continuous learning loop, and I would actually fund experimental behavior. Oh, you don't have budget? You're going to learn something from this? Let's put some money behind it.
Yeah, and I agree. My 2 would not actually touch technology for a second. I would say one is formalize insights and fund them, and as a part of what the organization is doing, the DNA, in the same way that maybe in the past you funded market research as a way to understand the forest. And then second would be invest in that cross-functional communication understanding, so that the process doesn't turn into a report gets generated every month, next to nobody reads it, and the process is turning, but it's not doing anything, versus the stakeholders are educated into how to interpret what they're getting, and do things with it or change it.
Well, fantastic words to finish on. We have hit the hour, I'm afraid, guys. Nothing left except to say a huge thank you to everyone in the audience who's been listening in. A special thank you to the panel. A gold star to Justin, because he's in California and he had to get up earlier than the rest of us this morning. And obviously, huge thanks to Lance and his wonderful team at Within3 for their support in making sure today happened. Kieran, Sonal, great insights. Absolutely wonderful to have you on board. I'm going to hold open this room. I know you're already a minute late for your next meeting, but I'm going to hold this open for 2 more minutes in case you have any ideas, things that you'd like to share. Messages of thanks are always appreciated, but any ideas for future sessions as well would also be really, really valuable. So anything that you can say there would be great. And once again, wonderful contribution from our panel today. Good luck for the rest of your week and beyond as you try and make this work. And I look forward to hearing from many of you in the near future. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.